Hi, this is Dan Behringer back with you on our series on the Agile concepts, introducing these to you. In the last discussion, we went over those mindset aspects, the core values and principles. In this segment, what I'd like to do is focus in on the Scrum. The Scrum is the centerpiece of the activities of the Agile team. So let's talk about the Scrum. In an Agile environment, everything starts with a product vision, a product roadmap. In other words, someone has an idea. Now, as we mentioned in kind of the first segment or the first session of all of these videos, we talked about the fact that Agile fits well in a project environment when we're not very experienced in what we're doing, and it's also dealing with a lot of uniqueness. That means that someone has to have an idea that fits in that spot, that it's not routine, it's something new that we're going to tackle. In creating the vision or the roadmap, it's the overall goals and objectives of what you're trying to achieve. From that vision, you get typically a set of features. And again, we're talking primarily with software development, a set of features that you would want to deliver to your customers. Now, if you don't work in a software development environment, you can come up with an equivalent to features. What these are high-level deliverables. In this respect, Agile planning and a plan-driven approach kind of actually mimic each other a little bit. They're very similar, and that we want to kind of decide from a high level what it is we're going to accomplish. Once we have that, then we can describe user stories that correspond to the features that you can find in the roadmap. Now, those user stories typically follow a syntax by which we write things from the user's perspective. So as a role in the enterprise, I want to take this action so that I can, and then you further understand the action in a description. So it follows those three things. We want to see this from the user's perspective because that is going to find its way into what we're going to develop. We're not developing from a system perspective. We're developing from a user perspective, that the user can use what it is that we're delivering. Once we have all this done, then we're ready to actually start the Scrum itself. And it starts with a planning day. The planning day is set aside for planning which stories, based upon the priority that they sit within the backlog as it relates to those features, based upon the priority. And priority, of course, is very important. We're learning as we go. The one thing that people can state is not necessarily what it would look like, but what is the priority? What do we think has the most value? So we're working in a strict ordered list through that product backlog and coming up in our planning day with what we call the sprint backlog. That sprint backlog, the planning day, starts the sequence that we call the Scrum. Once we have that sprint backlog, we're ready to go ahead and start working. We're going to work in a cyclical manner within the Scrum itself. What do I mean by that? We're going to work, test, or inspect, and adapt. These core principles, these core things with Agile, the core mindset is work as a delivery, then test, inspect, and adapt. And we're going to run that within a 2 to 4 week sprint time frame. Now, oftentimes people ask me, well, we're just getting started with Agile. Should we do this should we really start with a 4-week sprint so that, we can still get things done? My advice is always to start with a shorter sprint. Why? Because Agile is about adopting a mindset and behaviors, teaming behaviors. And we're going to go a lot more into that in in PMP exam prep is produced by or brought to you by Projects by Design, how that all works. We want to make sure the team is working together according to those principles. So the more we practice those behaviors, the more often we practice those behaviors, the more accustomed the team will be. So we want to plan frequently, every 2 weeks. And then also within the sprint, we're going to run a daily status meeting, if you will, called the daily stand-up. The daily stand-up is something that's borrowed from the lean methodology, which is to say that everyone on the team is going to get together, talk about what they did the previous day, what they plan to accomplish today, and are there any blockers? And blockers need to be removed so people can continue the work. That's on a daily basis. It is no more than 15 minutes. We want people's focus and attention. It is not for a working session. It's for information sharing, and then we'll go back together to collaborate later. Once we're ready to meet with the customer and review what has been accomplished in the sprint, we will hold what's called a sprint review. That sprint review determines at the end of the sprint whether or not the stories in the sprint backlog that have been committed to be delivered by the team are actually ready and acceptable. If they're done, then they're going to eventually find their way into a release in which the customer is now going to start taking the benefit from the stories that are delivered. The release may not necessarily be timed with the end of the sprint or the end of the Scrum, as it were. The release may be a quarterly basis, a monthly basis, or whatever the case may be. This is going to be determined within your enterprise context. However, once it's done, it's ready to be released. If something is not done, in other words, it's not accepted by the customer, it simply gets put back into your backlog as a user story. That's not to say the sprint backlog, because it gets prioritized along with all of the other work in your product backlog, and you would go through a planning in the next sprint no different than you did for this sprint. So we should not assume that work that was not done in this sprint, or that was not accepted, I should say, automatically gets picked up in the next sprint. It needs to get prioritized along with all the other work. It may be that we realize, you know what, it really didn't have as much priority as we first thought. Therefore, we're going to go ahead and put it back in the backlog, but there may be higher priorities that we want to start committing ourselves to for the next sprint. The last thing that we're going to do as far as the Scrum is concerned is we're going to hold what's called a retrospective. This is a way that we can learn what went well, what didn't quite go as well, and those things that we want to choose and assign to team members to select for improvement. This is the Scrum in its general sense. Now, you may have seen things similar to this or variations of this. Every organization may adopt things a little bit differently. It's for your organization to figure it out, right? How these things go. In the next session, we're going to talk about Agile roles. What are the roles that need to be fulfilled in order for that sprint or that Scrum to be effective? Thanks for listening. We're looking forward to the next session. You can always find us at projectsbydesign.net. Send us an email at contact@projectsbydesign.net or call us at 843-480-0388. We look forward to hearing from you.